Hi, we're here with Fred Hocker, Director of Research at the Vasa Museum in Sweden. Fred, tell me a little bit about the organization.
We are a consortium of 5 museums. We are the National Maritime and Transport Museums of Sweden, mostly maritime museums, but we also have railways and civil aviation. And each one of those museums has a specific audience or a specific collection that we interpret. I work at a museum that's based around a largely intact, huge wooden warship that sank in 1628 and was recovered more or less intact from the bottom in 1961.
Wow, and that's the Vasa.
That's Vasa is the name of the ship.
Fantastic.
We're the biggest tourist attraction in Sweden or in Scandinavia, and we have a very large flow of visitors, which gives us a really big audience. But it also gives us some real challenges in how we manage. How do we tell our story?
Yeah. Now, as Director of Research, what do you oversee at the museum?
Well, we have an in-house research team of 3 of us who are full-time professional researchers, and then we work together with a lot of external partners, mostly universities in Sweden and in other countries, developing individual research projects to answer specific questions about parts of our collection or about the period in which the ship was built. We're trying to build a research program that looks at Vasa as broadly and deeply as possible. What are all the different stories that ship can tell us about?
Yeah, that's just amazing. So we're here at the ICMM conference in Rotterdam.
Right.
What do you hope to achieve here while you're here?
Well, I'm wearing another hat while I'm here because I'm also on the executive council of the International Congress of Maritime Museums as the head of the maritime archaeology career. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to encourage our member museums to see the value that maritime archaeology could provide for them, but also to help them in how they address maritime archaeological finds. It's very common that people have recovered stuff from the bottom of the sea and they might want to donate it to a museum or they might want to sell it to a museum, but there are potential ethical pitfalls or legal pitfalls in that. And so one of the things that our group does within ICMM is to offer assistance to museums that don't have their own in-house archaeological staff for them to evaluate those kinds of things. Or if somebody comes with an exhibition of material from a shipwreck, how do they evaluate the value of that exhibition to them and whether that material has been recovered in an ethical manner and we can encourage people to go visit.
That is fantastic. So let me ask you, is there anything upcoming or any projects that you're working on right now that you'd like people to know about?
Well, we're opening a new exhibit at the Vasa Museum that is an updating of an older exhibit we have, which is, we haven't settled on the final title now, but the publication that goes with it is called In Life and Death, that the remains of 15 people were found in and around the ship when it was excavated. And we've spent a lot of time in the last 10 years looking at those remains, the clothes they were wearing, the things they had in their pockets, to get some kind of sense of who they are. And by DNA analysis, isotope analysis, we've been able to figure out a lot of things about them, such as stuff, big picture things like where did they come from? Where was their genetic heritage? Where did they grow up? If we look at the isotopes in your teeth, we can tell you where you grew up. If we look at the isotopes in your arm bones, we can tell you where you lived in the last 10 years. And so we can create life histories for these people who lived 400 years ago. We can look at their clothing to get a sense of how ordinary people dressed, because the Swedish Navy was mostly manned by conscripts and the Navy did not provide clothing for them. So they showed up in their own clothing and they're mostly just farm boys. The Navy also allowed sailors to have their wives living on board ship with them as long as the ship was in home waters. So we're not just looking at young men, we're looking at family units who are on board the ship. Gives us a really broad view out into coastal Swedish society. We also have the ability to tie that back to historical records about the recruitment process, about where the Swedish Navy came from in terms of where it recruited its people. And we can also study things that are probably not historically significant, but really interesting to our visitors. From DNA, we can say what color eyes and hair they had. We have one redhead who's a Finn. There aren't a lot of redheaded Finns, so he probably stood out in the crowd. We can see what kind of build you had. From DNA, we can see whether you're a natural sprinter or a marathon runner. gives us a kind of sense of the physical capability of people. And we can even tell you really critical stuff like whether you have wet or dry earwax.
Wow. Well, that's fascinating.
Right. Not that that's going to change anybody's interpretation of the 17th century, but that kind of detail is really human. And it's fascinating to museum visitors. It makes those people instead of objects. And that's really what we want to do in the exhibit that we're hoping will open in the winter or early spring of 2025 is we want to give people a chance to meet these people who lived 400 years ago, to realize they're not so different from them, and to give them some insight into what their lives were like, in their life histories, why they might have joined the Navy, what they were doing on board a ship that sank in 1648.
Oh, wow. That is absolutely fascinating. Fred, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.
All right.